When you think of 1995, you might remember the release of the original Toy Story movie.
You are a toy! You weren't the real Buzz Lightyear, you're an action figure!
Or maybe the coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial.
O.J. Simpson, in a knit cap from 2 blocks away, is still O.J. Simpson. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
But Arsenal fans will remember it as the last year they failed to qualify for European competition. Now, 25 years later, they're in the same position. As the Premier League restarts this week, Arsenal lay in 9th place, just 5 points off 5th place Manchester United with a game in hand. However, with an inexperienced head coach, playing squad, and sporting director, the Gunners are approaching their most precarious run-in recent times. Today, we preview Arsenal's remaining 10 games and examine if Arsenal is still a top 6 club.
It's very interesting. It feels like a real crossroads at the moment.
Tim Stillman is an Arsenal writer and podcaster for Arseblog.
The last couple of years haven't felt great on a visceral level because the unwinding of the Arsenal empire and then the Unai Emery thing really didn't work out, and there's been a lot of division in the fan base, and then with Unai Emery it felt difficult to engage with the team really. But I do feel like the appointment of Mikel Arteta is a bit of a new dawn, a bit of a new start. So to be honest, the last few years hasn't been fun, but I do get a sense that's changing.
So what's at stake for Arsenal during this run-in?
It's really weird. On one hand, I think it's a bit of a free swing because Arsenal are 9th and in some respects aren't really expected to do very much. On the other hand, I think there is a financial and sporting urgency to get into the top 6 and qualify for the Europa League. Certainly financially, Arsenal posted a 27 million loss in their accounts last year. They've obviously got the COVID thing as well, so the kind of the financial side isn't as strong as it's been. So I think internally there is a lot of pressure on Mikel Arteta to finish in the top 6. I don't think there is from the fan base, particularly because I think the fan base is a bit fatigued with the Europa League at the moment.
So do you think that they can leap into the top 6 or even potentially the top 5?
I think they can, yes. I think definitely they can, the top 6. But my kind of prediction is that they'll finish 6th. I think they could get 5th. I don't necessarily think that they will. I think there's been a clear uptick under Arteta, and we've got some quite winnable games left, albeit the first one away at Manchester City, maybe not so much, and we'll see how that impacts things if we get a bad result there. But I think we can. I think there's a quiet confidence, but not an expectation.
All professional football has been postponed until April the 4th because of the coronavirus outbreak. It comes after Arsenal head coach Mikel Arteta, amongst others, tested positive for the virus, with several other clubs affected. Well,
let's take a step back to a couple months ago. On March 12th, Arsenal's head coach Mikel Arteta tested positive for coronavirus, and the next day, the Premier League suspended the season. How is Arsenal doing at that time before the league was stopped?
Quite well, actually. Arsenal haven't been beaten since the end of December in the Premier League, so they've built up quite a nice little run. They've beaten Manchester United in that time. Again, they've had a clutch of fairly winnable games in that time, but they've also got to the quarter-final of the FA Cup. And again, it just really feels like Arteta's ideas are beginning to take hold. You could really see that the players and the fans were not engaged by the end of the Emery era. And what's quite interesting is what we've seen on the pitch has been still fairly up and down, to be honest. Better, but you know, there are still flaws there. But Arteta's really won everyone over, and I'd say nearly everyone in the fan base. And he wasn't a legend as a player, so he hasn't quite got that emotional cash that a Lampard or a Solskjaer has. Some people liked him, some people thought he was quite ordinary, but he's really won people over with the way he talks and what he says and the clarity with which he communicates, which was a real issue under Emery. So Arsenal were better, probably still a bit up and down in truth if you were to take a step back from it, but with a real sense that they were going in the right direction.
You mentioned that they're a bit up and down. When they were under Unai Emery, it always felt like Arsenal was maybe the biggest enigma of any Premier League club. Has Arteta, even though they're up and down a bit, been able to kind of forge an identity in his short time?
Yes, very quickly. So on one hand, we were so identity-less, bereft of identity under Emery, that it was such a low bar to clear. But I really think the clarity of Arteta's ideas and the way he talks about them, I think the players have really latched onto that. That's something that they missed. And one of the things you're not seeing under Arteta that you saw under Emery was just constantly tweaking the formation. And I think it came to a stage where everyone was just confused. Doesn't happen under Arteta. The shape is the same in every game and everyone can see it. You know, whether it's the right thing to do or whether it works in the long term, we will see. But it is already an improvement that we understand how Arsenal are trying to play. And I think the question now is, do we have the players to do it? Probably not at the moment, and it will probably take a couple of transfer windows to churn some of those players who can't do it and bring in some of the players who can. But absolutely 100%. You can see what Arsenal are trying to do under Mikel Arteta, which is already a big improvement.
You mentioned their shape. What is their shape? And you say what they're trying to do. Is there like a particular style that, he's molded them into?
So first off, they're physically much more intense, and that was very obvious from the off. And actually one of the issues Arsenal had in his early games was a big kind of tailing off physically towards the end of games because the players were asked to work much harder, to press much harder. What he's done effectively is, it's quite predictable in terms of it's very Guardiola-esque. In the tactical style, but it's that kind of moving from 2-3-5 kind of formation, and one of the things you can really see in the way Arsenal attack, they try to fill those 5 attacking lanes. So Granit Xhaka kind of drops back almost into left back, which allows the left back, usually Saka, to play like a winger, and then you've got Aubameyang as an inside forward, Lacazette or Nketiah in the centre. Ozil, the number 10, kind of drops into the right half space, and Pepe is out wide on the right, and so they fill up those 5 attacking lanes, and that's very Guardiola. And then you've got the kind of central midfielders, and the right back kind of tucks in as well to become like a third central midfielder, which again is a very Guardiola, almost WM actually, going back to Herbert Chapman kind of style, and you could see it from the first couple of games very clearly.
But perhaps maybe the biggest change has been defensively. Under Unai Emery, they gave up 27 goals in 17 games, and under Arteta, it's been 9 goals in 11 games. How has he revamped their backline?
So the backline itself hasn't been really. He has made some personnel changes. So, first of all, getting Hector Bellerin back from injury has helped, having an actual kind of right back there. And Bukayo Saka's been a real revelation, but largely for what he's been doing going forward. The answer is that the structure is just better. So on one hand, Emery didn't really like his centre-halves engaging, and so Arsenal sat off a lot and conceded a lot of shots. That doesn't happen under Arteta, and the kind of plan for filling spaces when the fullbacks go forward is just so much clearer. And I think just the level of instruction is clearer. They work much more as a unit, and so it is less dependent on individual player decisions. Because to be honest, Arsenal don't have an awful lot of quality in defence. And so when you overload them and overburden them to make their own decisions, that can be a bit of a disaster. So really, it's just been an improvement in the overall structure of the team.
This past summer, they thought they might have solved some of those issues when they signed David Luiz, which may have cost the club up to £24 million, according to The Athletic, just for this one season, when you combine his fees and his salary. We've talked about how Arsenal hasn't been that great this season defensively. They haven't really had a quality center-back pairing since Per Mertesacker and Laurent Koscielny. What does this run-in tell us about maybe their center-back situation going forward?
So I think in terms of the future of Arsenal's squad, that is the most interesting aspect of the end of this season. There are centre-backs there that Arsenal don't want. Sokratis has 1 year left on his contract. He doesn't really fit what Arteta wants. Mustafi has 1 year left. Arsenal have been trying to sell him for a while. David Luiz is a player that ordinarily I think Arsenal would want to keep, but the current financial situation, has complicated that because he's a big earner, and if Arsenal can't get rid of other centre-backs, then they might have to make a decision on him. They've got Pablo Mari on loan. I think they will keep him, and they will make that permanent because it's a fairly cheap deal to do. And then they've got Callum Chambers, who's injured, Rob Holding, who's been injured and hasn't really forced his way back into the team. What's interesting here is Arsenal have lots of centre-halves, but they don't really have any top-class ones. And they don't have a top-class partnership. So I think what they're really looking at is William Saliba, who comes in this summer, and he'll be able to play next season, and he's 19, coming from St Etienne, very, very highly rated. Pablo Mari is a player that's come in under Arteta, so he's someone that fits what Arteta wants to do. And whether that ends up being the long-term partnership, we'll see in the fullness of time. But, I think in Saliba, they're looking for, certainly for the future, that really top quality centre-half they haven't had. There's a lot of 3-star hotels back there, basically, and none of them really fit together to make a partnership. And I think that's where you'll see the biggest change in the next few months.
Someone who we haven't discussed is Kieran Tierney. He came over last summer for £25 million, and he hasn't played a single match under Arteta in the league. How does he factor into the final 10 games, and could this kind of be his opportunity to show the manager what he's worth, or, before he maybe moves in the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he'll be an important player under Arteta. Obviously, it's a player we signed before Arteta came, but I think he really fits what Arteta wants from his left back, which is to be very attacking, to be, part of the front line, basically, a bit like Bukayo Saka has been. And if I were Kieran Tierney, I'd be watching Bukayo Saka at the moment, who has possibly been Arsenal's standout player, bar Aubameyang, since Arteta came in, and I'd be thinking, wow, that's a position I want to play. Those are the areas I want to be in. He's had a really weird first season because he's just had injuries, and we still don't really have a sense of how good he is yet, because it's still a big jump from the SPL to the Premier League. But I think we'll get a really good look at him in that position, and Bukayo Saka will return to his natural position on the left wing. And I think from what I know about Tierney, I think this position and this style will really suit him.
Are you a fan of Football Today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode. We've talked about kind of the months that Mikel Arteta was managing the club, in live games, but obviously for the last 3 months or so, he's been managing kind of more behind the scenes. What has he and the club been up to during this lockdown?
This is one of the areas where Arsenal fans that I speak to at the moment are quite positive, because Arteta's attention to detail from how he appears just seems to be absolutely meticulous. Now he's been talking about holding like individual Zoom meetings with the players during this period, going over clips with them, but basically before training resumed, he was spending all day on Zoom with players, kind of going through individual coaching, and he's a very, very hands-on, details oriented coach. Actually, I think this break has possibly been quite good for him in terms of getting his ideas across, particularly the theory of his ideas. He's worked under Guardiola, and so he's big on the theory of football. But there was also another very interesting interview with Steve Round, his assistant, and Steve Round was talking about changing the culture as well, and he's been focusing on behaviours of the Arsenal players. So doing things like, look, if your teammate doesn't pass to you, don't throw your arms up in the air, don't have negative behaviours. And so they've really gone to work, by the sounds of it, first on the kind of the tactical side remotely, but also the cultural side. And I think that's something that Arteta's really big on. And actually, it's been such a whirlwind for him to start a job on Boxing Day and then cope with things like a pandemic breaking out. Like, what an introduction to management. So in a way, I think he might have welcomed this little stop just to take a breath and really appraise the players of his ideas.
But I think something else that should be mentioned during this lockdown is that in April, the club hierarchy and the players agreed to a 12.5% pay cut. And there were some reports that kind of revealed there might have been a bit of friction or tension maybe between the two sides, and that Mikel Arteta was kind of able to kind of bridge that divide. What did you make of that incident?
It's fascinating. Arsenal is still the only club that have negotiated a pay cut with their players. And look, negotiating pay cuts is always contentious. Nobody takes a pay cut easily. However, I think where a lot of Arsenal fans, myself included, are quite positive about Arteta, there are some misgivings about the executive layer of the club, particularly Raul Sanllehi, who's going with a very, very agents-led, contacts book-led approach with transfers, which makes some Arsenal fans a little bit nervous, to be honest. But yeah, the way the kind of the pay cut, the fact that it's happened at all and Arsenal are the only club to have done it, and the way it was handled and the way it got quite public, there was lots of leaking and counter-leaking, which to me suggests that there's not quite the trust there. And the fact that Arteta, it sounds like, was asked to bridge that gap, to me is concerning. It says to me that there is not a trust issue with the coach, but there is still a trust issue with the executive layer of the club. And that for me is a concern for Arsenal, definitely.
So essentially kind of what you're saying is that they're not still all on the same page going forward.
I don't think so, no. And we'll see what the long-term consequences of that are. But I think the optics of Arsenal being the only club to have done that, I don't think that will have healed any rifts that might have cropped up in this period.
It feels like in this run-in, there, even more so than other clubs, this club, Arsenal, has a lot of players in flux. You know, who are some players who maybe have a lot to play for that could leave the club or might get more minutes next year as a result?
So the ones who've got a lot to play for, who might leave the club, someone like Ainsley Maitland-Niles, he was frozen out. He started under Arteta and was then frozen out, and there was some suggestion that Arteta wasn't entirely happy with his application. He's been playing as a fullback, he sees himself as a midfielder, but he's played 2 of the warm-up games so far in midfield, so he's definitely got something to play for. I would say Eddie Nketiah has a lot to play for. He started 6 of Arsenal's last 8 games prior to the lockdown because Lacazette wasn't in very good form. Arteta took him back from Leeds on loan and decided not to send him out again. He's a player for whom the door is slightly open, and a strong finish to the season will really, really help him. Players like Saka and Martinelli, in terms of the young players, like they don't have an awful lot more to prove in this 9-game period. Everyone kind of accepts that they are part of Arsenal's future. But yeah, some of those young players, someone like Rob Holding, perhaps, who struggled to come back to full fitness, hasn't really figured under Arteta yet, but there might be some churn in the defence. So he's another one. And then someone like David Luiz, he's on a 1+1 contract, hasn't signed for next season yet. He's playing for another contract, so he's got a lot to play for example. So, and Dani Ceballos, he's on loan from Real Madrid. There are quite a lot of players. Really, the only players who don't have question marks are probably Bernd Leno, Hector Bellerin, Aubameyang, guys like that. I think everyone else has really got something up for grabs on the line here.
You mentioned Aubameyang. He's under contract for 1 more year and is turning 31 on this coming up Thursday. What should Arsenal do with him in the summer?
That's so difficult because I think prior to COVID, it would have been very simple. We will offer him X amount a week and up to X amount a week, and if he refuses, we will sell him for Y. Now, in both scenarios, X is probably lower in terms of what we can offer him, and Y is certainly going to be lower in terms of what we can get for him in the market. And if you're Aubameyang at this stage, you're probably thinking, well, if I just wait this out another year, I'll be on a Bosman and everyone's finances will probably look a little bit better. However, like you say, he's 31, and so realistically, now is really the time if he wants to move. I was in favour of reluctantly selling and using the money to regenerate, because Aubameyang's 31. Arsenal are not going to win the league in the next couple of years. It's not going to happen. So I don't think selling Aubameyang is going to stop us sweeping to glory, and Arsenal need to generate revenue. I just question now what that revenue might look like, and maybe it would be better to kind of keep him for another year and maybe sell Lacazette. So I think it's entirely dependent on the amount of interest there is. If someone comes in with a good offer, I think we should take it reluctantly and say, you've been brilliant, thank you very much, but we need to regenerate. But I'm doubtful that that might happen now.
We've mentioned Arsenal's financial issues and struggles. Last season, they made £50 million less in revenue than Chelsea. And if they don't qualify for the Europa League next season, they'll be down another 30 million or so pounds annually from that. Football finance expert Kieran Maguire said, quote, Arsenal are in danger of becoming detached from the rest of the big six in terms of generating revenue. So that's kind of all of a preface for how concerned are you about the club in the bigger picture if there isn't significant investment, which appears unlikely?
So that is absolutely a concern, and one that the club should absolutely take seriously. I think if you're a club like Leicester, who are about to go into the Champions League again, which means they'll have played in it twice in the period since Arsenal last qualified. If you're Wolves, who are very, very ambitious and very well backed. If you're Everton, likewise. Although I still think Everton are a little bit of a mess, to be honest. But if you're one of those clubs looking to break in, I am sure that behind closed doors, those clubs are saying Arsenal, who, like you say, their revenue's falling and has been falling, and have just negotiated a pay cut with their players, and Tottenham, who have just paid for a new stadium and just taken a loan of 175 million from the Bank of England. If you're Wolves or Leicester at the moment, those are the two clubs you definitely have your eye on. And let's not forget that Wolves could qualify for the Champions League as well. They have two avenues available to them to do that. So it is absolutely a threat. I don't necessarily think it will happen. I do think Arsenal have the right coach to take them forward, and I do think they're probably on the right track now. That said, I definitely have observations at executive level, and that prevents me from saying absolutely that it's not a worry. It is a worry, and I kind of think at the moment that that's where Arsenal should be looking before they look up, effectively. I think those are the clubs they should worry about. That said, I do think that Arsenal can fix this. I don't think it's beyond the pale for them to get back where they were kind of even 5-6 years ago relatively quickly if they're smart.
You said earlier that you think that they will get top six and get the Europa League again. If they don't and they stay in ninth place where they are right now, what does their future look like in your opinion?
I think in a way, a year without you, and this is a debate that's happening amongst Arsenal fans at the moment, because a lot of fans just are bored with the Europa League, myself included, don't like it, find it a real pain. It ruins the kind of schedule, both as a fan and I think for the players, but obviously we understand the financial imperative. But a lot of Arsenal fans are of the opinion that actually a year out of Europe might be quite good, particularly with this new coach who is so details oriented that going down to one game a week could be hugely advantageous. So let's say, for example, next season Arsenal aren't in Europe and Wolves and Leicester are, then Arsenal could take advantage of that domestically, I think. Not easily, but that they could. I don't think there are that many players at Arsenal at the moment for whom the Europa League is a kingmaker to their future. For someone like Aubameyang, he'll want to play in the Champions League, and rightly so. I don't think there are too many players at the moment there that are thinking, oh, if Arsenal don't qualify for the Europa League, I'm off. And anyone that thinks like that, I don't think there are too many that would be upset to lose in that scenario. So I don't think it would be the end of the world. I think it would be bad, but I think it would have a potential upside to it as well.
You can read Tim Stillman's ongoing coverage of both Arsenal's men's team and women's team on Arseblog. This episode was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today.